Hello, hello, hello. So everyone take your sandwich and take a really big bite. Ready? 1, 2, 3, big bite. Wow, look how quiet it gets with food in your mouth. Excellent, good job. Well, welcome back to our afternoon session here. For those of you that did not find your lunch, it's wandering around the hallway over there, and it moves slowly, so you should be able to catch it. But if everyone can grab their lunch, we're going to get started. I know that there's some people in the overflow room, so if there's an empty chair next to you, please raise your hand. Let people know they're looking for seats. Okay, we got our eyes on that. Johnny is around. Direct people down. I'm going to do a few thank yous, and then I will hand this off to Violet, the chair walker, to do the ceremony. First, we couldn't hold this assembly every year if it wasn't for our sponsors. They step up every year, and they not only donate money to cover a lot of the costs to do this, they also are supporting us throughout the year in a lot of the work that we do. So I want to thank all of our sponsors. They're all listed out in your brochure. Please pull those out and have those memorized. There'll be a quiz later. But I want to acknowledge my gold and silver sponsors and make sure that they're named here. Karstens, Black & Mintier, LLP. I know there's a number of you here from the law firm. National Wildlife Federation, and Sage Sweetword. Those are our gold sponsors. Sacramento Municipal Utility District, and Shoot, Mahaly, and Weinberg. So thank you all to all of our sponsors, but especially our gold and silver sponsors. Yes, thank you. Next, I want to acknowledge some of our elected and our appointed officials here that are with us today. I do this, I know it's kind of customary to do this. I actually am honored to do this. I think that this is what makes democracy work. And so I say all the way down to school boards and local water districts are so important for people to get involved in. I encourage all of you to run for local office at some time in your life. I did it, and I don't know that I'll ever do it again, but it was a great learning experience. So I want to acknowledge these people. We have here with us today A.G. Bonta. He's going to be speaking in a minute, so he'll be introduced in just a minute. We also have Sacramento City Council member Roger Dickinson. He's around here somewhere. He just got elected recently. Used to be an assembly member. We have a SMUD board member, Heidi Sandborn. Is Heidi here? Okay. I don't know if they're in this room or the next one. Brandon Rose from SMUD board, and SMUD board member Rosanna Herber. So there's 3 SMUD boards. Local utility district, very important to run for those offices. We also have the former California Insurance Commissioner, Dave Jones. He's here, yes. He just held the very robust wildfire insurance panel this morning, for those of you that were in it. And then former Mayor of Sacramento, Darrell Steinberg. Thank you, Darrell, for coming by. He's retired now, so if you have any jobs for him, I think he's looking for one. Yeah. Thank you, Mayor. It's great having you here. Yes. You're looking for a job? Yeah, retired? Okay. And the chair is going to come up here in a minute and do her ceremony, so I'll let her introduce herself, okay? I also want to thank the PCL board. They're my boss. They allow me to do this wonderful job. I'm not going to go through all 28 of my board members, but if you're a PCL board member, can you please stand up so that we can all ogle you and thank you. Thank you. And lastly, and most importantly, I want to thank my staff and especially Johnny. Where's Johnny? There's Johnny. He's my deputy. He keeps everything running at PCL. He's the glue that keeps us all sane, and he's the one that organized this. So thank you, Johnny. Appreciate you. Okay, enough of my thank yous. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. Yes, you have index cards that Johnny and others were handing out as you walked into the room. Those index cards are for questions for the Attorney General after his keynote speech. We'll take a moment then in between to introduce our second speaker. And then, yeah, I think that's the logistics. And then we're going to raffle, yes. So we're going to raffle some books off of Kim Stanley Robinson's books that we have. I was going to give out cars and put tickets under your seat like Oprah does, but we couldn't fit it into this budget. So we're sticking with books. And he's going to be out in the hallway after his talk to sign them if you would like to have his book signed, okay? All right, I'd like to bring up to the podium Chair Walker. Thank you so much.
For so long, this sanctuary was just a twinkle in the eye of the Central Coast, an idea that many had, including those who are no longer with us. But it is said, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Today we celebrate that we went together to make this dream into a reality.
The legacy that we want to leave behind is one of protecting our sacred places, protecting our heritage, our culture, and our animal relatives. And today is the first ocean protection in nearly 30 years for national marine sanctuaries. 30 years this has been in the making.
I imagine I speak for most of us here when I say my heart is full today of gratitude and appreciation for those of you who have been working for decades to make this day happen.
With this designation, we are honoring the ancestors and descendants of the people who stewarded these lands and waters since time immemorial.
This is the first sanctuary ever nominated by a tribe, but not the last. I feel like this is something that we gave birth to, and I feel like it's our baby and our child. And I feel like today is a big day that like your child goes to school and you're seeing him off into the world and you're hoping for their safe return. And today I am gifting our baby to Noah. Please take care of it. We would like it back in one piece. We would like it to be whole all the way to the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. Every day I just wish my dad was here and I could tell him that we did it.
In my lifetime, to be able to see something like that happen, to see something preserved, you know, having grown up with the oil spills that we've experienced in Santa Barbara, and to see the wildlife that does come up, to hopefully have an end to all that. I was so excited. I was so happy to think that the kids that are growing up now will not see what we saw. They won't know anything different, and that's how it should be.
So it's not often that a tribe gets to stand up here and on behalf of a tribal nation acknowledge great work of a really important government official and an essential and critical part to the reason why we're here today and the reason why a tribe was able to put forward the first National Marine Sanctuary nomination ever. Today, on behalf of our tribe, to honor a visionary leader and a steadfast champion for California's environment, Secretary Wade Crowfoot. He embodies the spirit of my father, and he stands up for the protection of the ocean and the people who call this place home. As the Secretary of Natural Resources, Wade Crowfoot oversaw the stewardship and incredible landscapes of over 1,000 miles of stunning coastline and majestic mountains and expansive deserts. The agency also manages the largest state park system in the nation and plays a vital role in the preservation of California's historical and cultural treasures. Wade's tireless dedication to protecting our natural resources and building a sustainable future embodies the spirit of the Environmental Warrior Award. Under his leadership, California is achieving remarkable progress towards Gavin Newsom's ambitious environmental vision, including the groundbreaking commitment to conserve 30% of California's land and coastal waters by 2030. Wade has been instrumental in advancing the designation of the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary and two new national monuments, the Chuckwalla National Monument near Joshua Tree and the Satila Highlands National Monument in Northern California, safeguarding critical wildlife habitats and areas of profound cultural significance to California Native tribes. Secretary Crowfoot also championed a new era of collaboration with California Native American tribes, overseeing $107 million in funding for 34 tribes to get land back. He championed this historic return with nearly 50,000 acres of ancestral land returned to tribes through the Tribal Nature-Based Solutions Grant Program, ensuring that stewardship and environmentalism is rooted in equity and inclusivity. Beyond his work with tribal communities, Wade oversaw billions of dollars in public investments to protect Californians and natural places from escalating impacts of climate change, including droughts, wildfires, and floods. Through his career, he has been a trailblazer, leading the Water Foundation to enhance resiliency across the American West and championing California's landmark climate change policies during his tenure at the Environmental Defense Fund. Wade's leadership transcends policy. It's about action, partnership, and ensuring every Californian can thrive in harmony with nature and the natural world. His legacy is that California is not only resilient, but will be thriving in a state where our people, lands, and water flourish together. Please join me in welcoming Secretary Wade Crowfoot, a true environmental warrior, for his extraordinary contributions and unwavering commitment to sustainability, equity, and a future for all California.
Thank you so much. Awesome. Incredible. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me.
It means a lot to me.
Yeah.
You did a good job.
I know.
Let me give you this.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Can we get some pictures?
Yeah. Well, I got to say, I'm touched. This means a lot to me. And I can say that I am so proud that our agency, our state, our administration was able to support you and your dad's vision and your persistence over decades. For those that are not familiar with this campaign, this was the campaign that so many dismissed as not improbable, but impossible. Violet and a very few number of people on the Central Coast were lonely voices that were calling for a completely different model of ocean conservation, tribally shaped and tribally led. And that momentum built over time, and our agency, on behalf of the governor, was able to get involved, really what was probably one of the final chapters towards the designation. And I want to acknowledge three of my colleagues that did a lot of the hard work at the end. We had our active partner in the Biden-Harris administration, but even then, as Violet said in the video, it had been decades since a significant national marine sanctuary was established, and one shaped and led by tribes had never been established. So three of my colleagues were really instrumental in helping get this over the finish line. Geneva E.B. Thompson, who is our first ever Deputy Secretary for Tribal Affairs, Jen Eckerly, who leads our Ocean Protection Council, and then LaQuinn Wynn, who manages energy policy, which was really important as we were helping navigate the desire and the interest of establishing offshore wind in this region. And those are only just a few people that were involved. The reason I'm most proud is this is a big step forward on a journey. And it's, to me, the most remarkable thing that I'll do in this role, and that I think a lot of our colleagues will, and that is to shift the paradigm. You know, 3 months after he took office, Governor Newsom asked and invited tribal leaders from across California to Sacramento at the site of the future Native American Heritage Center, which will be in West Sacramento. And he did something remarkably that no other governor had done in California's history. And he offered an unconditional apology to California Native American tribes. And I was there that day under an incredible centennial oak tree where he read the inaugural address of California's first governor, putting a financial bounty funded by the state on the heads of Native women and children. State-sanctioned genocide at the founding of our republic. And that that moment was followed by decades and well over a century of dispossession, of the stealing of land, of discrimination, and disconnection. And agencies like the one that I now lead actually arrested tribal members for cultural practices, for traditional practices that now we're desperately working to employ on our landscape. So this is the legacy that we inherit. And why I'm proud is this paradigm is shifting. And we're shifting the paradigm to support tribal leaders stewarding what we know as California. It's not only the right thing to do, given that history, it's the smart thing to do. Tribal people have been caring for our lands and waters for longer than we know. And as I've learned, and I've been in this job, I'm so humbled to be out there on the land with Native leaders and elders and experts, because the breadth and the depth of what we consider to be environmental knowledge by our tribal communities is well beyond what even our smartest Western scientists know. And I can remember we were at the site of the state's newest state park, Dos Rios, which we're very proud to have open, at the confluence of the Tuolumne and the San Joaquin rivers. And we were with scientists as well as Native leaders. And these PhD scientists were blown away to understand from the Native leaders and the basket weavers who had been collecting the interaction of a lot of the plants and animals that they'd actually never learned about in the work that they had done on these very ecosystems. So we're supporting tribal leadership and working to shift the paradigm. And that looks like supporting tribal leaders when they step up and want to protect waters, like the Chumash National Marine Sanctuary, the first tribally led, tribally shaped sanctuary in the country. It looks like 2 new national monuments that President Biden signed in his last 3 days in office in the eastern Coachella Valley and then up east of Mount Shasta. It looks like the expansion of 2 other national monuments, Berryessa Snow, as well as the San Gabriel National Monument. Yeah, incredible. And it looks like supporting those tribal leaders. It also looks like ancestral land return, over 30,000 acres to California Native American tribes, with a lot more on its way. And it looks like co-management or co-stewardship. You know, we started 5 years ago. We have 280 parks across the country, across the state parks, I should say, about 1.4 million acres of land. Didn't have any established co-management agreements with tribes. 5 years later, 54% of state lands, of that 1.4 million acres of land, is co-stewarded and co-managed according to those agreements. So we're on a pathway. We're on a pathway. And I lastly say it's a paradigm shift that I think many non-Native leaders in the environmental community share. It's about recognizing that our environmental movement, the traditional mainstream environmental movement, for so long got it wrong. This notion that we were protecting, or we are protecting, a wilderness that's devoid of people is just wrong. People are nature, nature is people, and that's what tribal leaders have taught us. So I'm really gratified to be just one of many people, one of many allies, one of many supporters, Violet, supporting this incredible movement that culminated in this designation, and so much more. And I'll lastly say, I'm really thankful to live in California right now. And we'll understand why when we hear from our next speaker, who's an incredible leader. But I just came from Los Angeles last night, where I've been for a better part of 2 weeks. And I can tell you, these will be challenging times. On this whole topic, we have a new president that issued an executive order to completely overhaul the way that this movement towards renaming places, moving away from discriminatory names, names that insult, names that don't identify the true nature of place, changing Denali Mountain to Mount McKinley. So just one example of why your work through PCL, your allyship towards tribes, is going to be essential. and why we are so thankful to have the Attorney General, Rob Bonta, doing the work. So, Violet, thank you so much. The best is yet to come.
Talk about a paradigm shift from 100 years ago to today, when I can stand up here and compliment, support, and be proud of working with government officials together to build the newest and the greatest version of what California should look like. I grew up in a small tribe in California. We learned to defend what was left. Our 1% is what my dad called it. My father raised me to fear no challenge. He always said that on the front lines, we should be there speaking up for Chumash, our Mother Earth. He said, do the right thing, even if you're alone. Oftentimes, conservation is fighting for human rights. It's lonely, it's thankless. He always said to me, the difference between us and other people is that we show up, we speak up, and we fight for those with no voice. And remember that we carry 1,000 ancestors walking behind us, supporting us. And so, with that being said, 3 years ago, I was featured as an environmental hero. I won a 2022 award called Badass in Green. California Environmental Voters Award. It was great. I was sitting in the green room ready to go on the stage when Attorney General Rob Bonta came in and sat down next to me. I asked him why he was there. He wasn't on the program. And he said he was there for me. He said he was there to introduce me and give me the award. And I thought about that when I heard he was coming to lunch. Thinking back, I appreciate that someone would take the time to show up for others, doing good work, take valuable time out of your day, out of your weekends, take the energy to celebrate and encourage others doing good work that we're all doing in this room. I took this day as an opportunity, and it's my privilege to stand here before you today as a chairwoman of a California tribe to honor someone who's truly embodied the principles of our tribe of justice, equity, and environmental stewardship, Attorney General Rob Bonta. Every Californian deserves the right to live healthy, safe, and in a thriving community. Yet we all know too well that low-income communities and tribes, people of color, bear the burden of environmental pollution. The Attorney General has made it his mission to ensure fairness, equity, and accountability are at the heart of California's environmental policies. Since taking office in 2021, the Attorney General has championed groundbreaking efforts to protect frontline communities from expanding the Department of Justice Bureau of Environmental Justice, to holding big polluters accountable, to defending California's Environmental Quality Act. His leadership has amplified the voices of those who are often ignored. His vision for the future is inspiring. Rob reminds us that California boasts one of the largest economies in the world, but our greatest strength lies in our diversity and inclusivity. And we choose truth, hope, and light over falsehoods, hate, and darkness. We are California. We are always looking forward, ready to meet any challenge, whether it's fighting to remediate contaminated drinking water, reducing toxic exposure, or taking a bold stance against federal actions that threaten our public health in our state of California. The Attorney General's work has set a standard for what it means to be an environmental warrior. His unwavering commitment to fairness and his tireless advocacy for environmental justice have made a tangible difference in the lives of countless Californians. And today, I would like to honor his visionary leadership and dedication to protecting our communities and our planet, and thank him for being here today, for his courage and his passion and determination to fight for what's right. Please join me welcoming California Attorney General Rob Bonta as the 2025 Environmental Warrior Awardee.
Thank you, Chairwoman Walker, for the very kind words, for the award. It means a lot certainly to receive it. It means a great deal, a true honor to receive it from you. And so thank you, a true badass environmental warrior. Gotta say badass as many times as possible. And it was my honor and privilege to be able to provide you with that award and give it to you. well-deserved. Thank you for all you've done, are doing, will continue to do. And I'm really grateful to be here. I wanted to say this for a moment. I was listening to the chairwoman talk about her father, and I think at this time of challenge and headwinds, it's always important for us to find inspiration and hope and strength. And I gained that from my parents, who are my biggest advocates, my biggest supporters, and the lessons I learned from them speak to me today. I had a mom who was an immigrant from the Philippines who came here when she was 28 years old after living in the Philippines for all those years, and came here seeking opportunity. She took a ship for 3 weeks to arrive in Berkeley, California. She met my father, and they met in 1965. And at that time, my dad was organizing and involved with the civil rights movement. He had a friend across the country in Selma, Alabama, who was sending him through the mail audio cassette tapes of the voice of an incredible leader who had this vision for a more just world and a more fair society. And those words were the words of Martin Luther King Jr., literally being sent in the mail to my dad across the country. And he felt this call to action, to be part of this vision that was being shared with him. And so he jumped on a train for 3 days on an Amtrak, arrived in Selma, Alabama, and met Stokely Carmichael, was in Brown Chapel AME Church when Martin Luther King Jr. appeared unannounced to deliver a sermon to the congregation, and he organized for civil rights and for voting rights. My parents later moved to the Philippines. That's when I was born, and my sister first, then me, and right after I was born, my parents asked themselves if they could raise me there and then and guarantee that I had the things that to them were non-negotiable, that I must have: freedom, democracy, the rule of law, due process, civil rights, human rights. Their answer was no, unfortunately. A dictator was rising to power. Martial law was around the corner. They were right about what they foresaw. Exactly a year from the date of my birth, martial law was declared. Ferdinand Marcos became a dictator. Free and fair elections were over. Democracy as they knew it gone. And political opponents to the dictator were arrested, imprisoned, tortured, and killed. My mom was an outspoken, unapologetic opponent to the dictator. She wanted democracy for her people, not dictatorship and fascism for her people. And so they moved to California. They brought me here. They wanted more opportunity for me. They wanted me to have a chance to pursue and realize my California dream. And they also knew that you can't just look out into the world and hope for the things that you want and then wait. You can't put your chin on your elbow and wonder and dream without acting, that you have to act, you have to fight, you have to do. So they started working for the United Farm Workers of America, started organizing, collecting signatures outside of supermarkets, and then we went to La Paz after being invited by the UFW to join them. And some of my earliest days and years were there, living in a trailer with my mom and my dad. My dad worked in the front office with Cesar Chavez. My mom worked with Dolores Huerta in the preschool, and they fought for the people that were feeding our state and our nation, believing that they deserve better, fair and safe working conditions, a fair contract, and they fought for that. And so those lessons have always stayed with me, and my mom reinforced them later as I grew up. I grew up here in Sacramento. I don't know who here is from Sacramento, but I went to Pershing Elementary School and Winston Churchill Middle School, Bella Vista High School, until I went away for college. And both my parents were state workers. But I grew up here in Sacramento. My mom continued to organize from here, fighting against the dictator an ocean away, year after year. And I would go to these protests and rallies and demonstrations with her, a little kid, doing what mom says, saying the chants she asked me to say, and holding up my sign. And I wondered what we were doing and what it would mean and how it could affect a dictator in power an ocean away. And we did it year after year until I realized what it meant. First, I realized we weren't alone, that there were thousands of people like us here in this country, in the Philippines, rising up, pushing back, calling out the injustice, the human rights violations, and demanding change. And then in 1986, 15 years later, the People Power Revolution ushered democracy back into the Philippines, and a dictator fled the country, never to return. And from the civil rights movement to the farm worker movement to the People Power Revolution, my parents taught me something that I will always remember, it'll always drive me, and I think it's important today. One, we have a say in our future. We don't just have to take it. If it's not acceptable, we don't have to accept the unacceptable. We can fight for better conditions. We can make tomorrow more fair than today. And second, we're unstoppable when we work together. The farm worker movement was a movement started by Latinos and Filipinos, later Black Americans, white Americans, and so many others joined the movement to fight. The People Power Revolution was people exercising the most powerful power there is, people power. And the Civil Rights Movement changed our country for the better, with people rising up and speaking out. And we're in that moment now where change is important, fighting back is important, being committed to our principles is critical. So I just wanted to share that because I know we're all looking for inspiration, strength, hope, and light in these difficult times, and I wanted to share a little bit about where I get some of mine. I want to give a special shout out to Wade Crowfoot, a great friend, an incredible leader, and most importantly, an excellent soccer player. I want you to know that. We've had we've had the chance to play together since he's been called to duty in Sacramento. Less opportunities to do that, but if you ever want to see old men running around the field, huffing and puffing, playing soccer, you can come watch me and Wade. That's more an apt description of me than of Wade. Wade is in great shape and does very well, but that's what you'll see if you ever come see me. Also, I want to just say a special shout out to Dave Jones, Darrell Steinberg, two great leaders who, from Sacramento, leading in Sacramento, California, the nation. I've had the opportunity to serve with both of them and continue to have that opportunity, grateful for it. And California is blessed with amazing leaders, and I'm proud that we're all in this fight together. So thank you. Thank you also to the Planning and Conservation League for welcoming me. I had an opportunity to attend back in 2022, a different time then. It was during the pandemic. It was all virtual. And while it was still a great event, it's hard to beat the energy and the collaboration and the feeling of being in one room at one time in person. So grateful for the opportunity to be here again. And we have challenges ahead. So let me be honest about that and also say I have every confidence that California and Californians will rise to meet them. Everyone is called to serve at a certain time and place. This is a time of challenge, of a federal administration that sees the world differently than us, that has different values and priorities. And that's the time. And the place is, I'm going to not cuss, but I'm going to say frickin' California. We are the largest state in the nation. We are the 5th largest economy in the world. We have led to the phrase, as California goes, so goes the nation. We drive so much change from here. And as we face these headwinds, we have people across this country worried and concerned and wondering who's going to step up. And they're looking west to us to see what we do, how we lead, how we fight. So I always believe we have an outsized role in the future of our nation and our world, and even more so now. Everyone in this room is very well aware of what a second Trump administration will likely mean for our planet. The executive orders this week alone have been devastating and also not surprising. So while painful to actually see it in black and white, the orders actually taken, these were all projected. These were all things that we suspected, that we knew that were being signaled, or if not outright promised on the campaign trail. Withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, trying to kickstart offshore oil and gas drilling throughout the outer continental shelf, blocking new offshore wind farms in federal waters, directing agencies to roll back emissions and energy efficiency regulations, calling for rerouting of water from the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta as part of a highly politicized and categorically false narrative that bleeding Northern California rivers dry would have prevented or helped fight the devastating fires in LA. Not true. very dangerous narrative to continue to advance. And the reality is it would have done nothing to address the major force that actually caused and worsened these fires, climate change. None of this is surprising. All of it is detrimental to our country's ability to meaningfully address the climate crisis at hand. A crisis, as you well know, is getting worse by the day. That's wreaking havoc on our environment, creating widespread devastation to our communities. And it is also a deeply unjust crisis that disproportionately harms vulnerable families, lower-income individuals, and marginalized communities who've long been overlooked and undervalued, who are overburdened and under-resourced. We truly, as you know, have no time to waste. Every year and month, day of inaction or steps backwards stands to incur more harm to our planet and to our people. As our global temperature creeps up, we've got to be dogged in our efforts to address this crisis through every avenue available. Unfortunately, we can't expect that leadership from the federal government for now. But I want to assure you all hope isn't lost. We've been preparing for this outcome at DOJ. We've been readying and preparing for months for this possibility. Between Trump 1.0, Project 2025, the president's own statements, his inner circle's declarations, we have a good idea of what's to come. And we're ready, whether it be litigation or legislation, be it immediate action in response to executive orders, and we took some this week, including suing the president and, for now, halting his unconstitutional executive order attacking birthright citizenship. Be it, thank you. Thank you, and I'll just say, I think it's very important that as soon as the president takes an unlawful action, violates the Constitution, that we smack him down immediately, so that he is conditioned. So whether it be action in response to executive orders, response to federal rulemaking, amicus briefs to support other states, or defending California law in court, we'll take each fight as it comes and respond as necessary. And let me be absolutely clear, where we see laws broken, the Constitution violated, where we see overreach by the president, we will haul him into court, and we will hold him accountable, and we will stop him, just as we did in Trump 1.0. And my office, the California DOJ, sued the president more than 120 times during that time. Most, and look, they're not policy differences or political differences. These are violations of the law. Most of the actions were environmental matters. We took him to court over 120 times. We won a vast majority of the time, over 2/3 of the time. A court determined that Trump broke the law, that he violated the law, that he overreached his authority. And so my goal, my hope is that, and I think it's a modest request, is that we have a president who follows the law, a president who does not break it consistently, who follows the Constitution. And if Mr. Trump follows the law, I will have absolutely nothing to do. And when it comes to suing him, we have a lot of other stuff that we're working on, and we walk and chew gum at the same time. But if he doesn't break the law, we're not going to court, because there's nothing to take him to court for. And you would expect that that should be something that a president could easily achieve, but it is not something that he has done. He didn't do it in Trump 1.0. He started his presidential administration coming out of the box on day one, blatantly violating the Constitution. Like literally the same day, he raised his hand, took an oath to uphold the Constitution, and then later that day signed an executive order that blatantly broke it on birthright citizenship. And the judge who issued the temporary restraining order in Washington said it was a blatant violation of the Constitution. He said his mind was boggled that the attorneys for the Department of Justice could advance the arguments that they were making. And that in 4 decades of serving on the bench since he was appointed by President Reagan, a Republican appointee, he had never seen such a clear case where the violation was so obvious. That's a day one action from Mr. Trump. And so I fear that he will be breaking the law and that we will be very busy. So we will take him to court every time he breaks the law and hold him accountable. And in Trump 1.0, we took Mr. Trump to court to block new coal mining leases on federal land, to force the Department of Energy to publish appliance efficiency standards, to maintain meaningful federal penalties when automakers fail to meet corporate average fuel economy standards. And we've already acted, of course, less than a week into Trump 2.0. We intervened in multiple lawsuits last week to defend Biden-era actions that we anticipate the Trump Department of Justice may no longer support. This includes challenges to California's Clean Air Act preemption waivers. As California's Attorney General, I promise you that I'm determined to put the full might of DOJ behind tackling the climate crisis, taking on corporate polluters, protecting vulnerable families, and fighting for everyone's right to clean water to drink and clean air to breathe. That promise is nothing new. It's one we've been delivering on at DOJ for years. In my first week as AG, and I'm coming up on almost my 4-year anniversary, so excited and honored to be able to serve in this role. Actually never thought I would. And you know, someone born in another country, raised by working class parents. I'll tell you this, the California dream is alive and well, I can assure you, because I'm living mine. So I know it to be true, and sometimes it's so unbelievable. I go onto the website to confirm that my name is actually there, that my photo is actually there, and I get very excited when I see it. In my first week as AG, I announced the expansion of our Bureau of Environmental Justice, a team focused on fighting environmental injustices and giving a voice to frontline communities who live at the intersection of poverty and pollution. We've enforced environmental justice land use planning requirements and issued guidance to help local governments build environmental justice into their long-term land use plans. We protected residents from unlawful water shutoffs, including in the border city, Calexico, where our investigation found the city had illegally shut off water more than 1,000 times during the height of the pandemic, when people needed water most. Thanks to our settlement, the city was required to pay $150,000 to nearly 500 consumers and demonstrate full compliance with California's Water Shutoff Protection Act. The right to access drinking water is fundamental. No family should have to endure hardships like the pandemic without the basic necessity of access to water. As the state that's home to a larger American Indian and Alaska Native population than any other in the nation, we're proud to partner with and support our tribal communities. Recently, that included supporting the Koi Nation after the city of Clear Lake failed to adequately consult them before making moves to put a hotel on a site with tribal cultural resources, a violation of CEQA and a violation of the tribal consultation requirements added by Assembly Bill 52. We've taken big polluters to court when they don't comply with our nation-leading environmental laws, including our lawsuit against ExxonMobil for conducting a decades-long campaign of deception to convince the public that recycling makes plastic, including single-use plastic, sustainable. It's a myth, let's be clear, that it does not make it sustainable. They have been lying to us and perpetuating the myth of plastic recycling. In a separate case, we sued ExxonMobil, Shell, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, BP, and the American Petroleum Institute to hold the companies accountable for their decades-long campaign of deception that has harmed the public health and our environment. They knew about climate change for decades. They knew the harm it would cause, and they knew that was a problem for their bottom line. So they put on a deliberate and intentional campaign of deception to undermine the climate science and try to convince people that climate change is not real. While oil and gas giants have pocketed massive profits, Californians have been forced to spend billions to weather the devastating repercussions of climate change and to try to adapt, costs that will keep piling up if we don't stand up to big oil. Costs that are felt the most by people who have the least. On top of that, we've helped defend federal rules like the US EPA's Vehicle Emission Standards, the Security and Exchange Commission's Climate Disclosure Rule, and EPA's drinking water standards for PFAS. That's just a short list of what we've accomplished, and we're far from done. There's no denying that we have turned the page. We're in a new chapter, a chapter full of challenge and calling us to step up and meet the moment. But who we are in California isn't changing. California's path to progress remains full steam ahead. We're not looking back, we're going forward. We are not seeking to pick fights with the president, but if he gets in the way of our progress, if he fights with us, we will defend ourselves and we will fight back. While our president cozies up to big oil and wages baseless attacks on common sense public health protections, California is going to continue to be the beacon of progress we've always been. So I'll continue to stand up for the people of California. We'll uphold the rule of law. We'll defend our nation-leading environmental legislation, no matter who is in the White House or who is leading Congress. Whatever President Trump throws our way, California is not going to back down. And fortunately, I know that you will not either. Thank you for having me. Happy to take any questions you might have.
We're lucky to have him. Like he said, we're lucky to live in California. Okay, you have some cards that we handed out if you have questions. So please hold them up. Johnny and others, if you can walk around and pick them up, that'd be great. I already started with 2 here. I'm going to kick it off with. If you were to identify one of the most important environmental issues for California that will be vulnerable with the new federal administration, what would that be?
So as we move into this new chapter with the federal administration, that one doesn't observe the same facts and science that we see, that has different values than us, and frankly, that has been involved, and I think will continue to be involved in political attacks on California. We're going to take each issue as it comes, and we don't want to signal or telegraph our vulnerabilities, what we're worried about. We think that the body of work that we have put together here in California when it comes to nation-leading, world-leading environmental stewardship and climate action that has led us when we leave this state and go to climate conferences and gatherings around the world like in New York or to COP, where people run up to our leaders like Wade and others and thank us for our leadership and tell us that we have been a beacon of hope for them and also a blueprint for their own conduct and action. We want to continue that, and we will protect that. And so do I think we're going to get attacks from the Trump administration? Absolutely, we already have. I'll say that Mr. Trump has demonstrated and has in Trump 1.0 and again in 2.0 that he likes to do what he wants, when he wants, how he wants. That does not work well with a government structure that has a separation of powers, checks and balances, rules and procedures that you have to follow, and it leads him to often break the law. And we are able to stop some of his most dangerous actions because he breaks the law in the process. There's a lot that he could do. He has an area of jurisdiction and authority as president. It's not unlimited, but it's powerful. And if he did things compliant with the law, he could create a lot of damage. So he hasn't done that, and that has given us opportunities to stop him and prevent some of the most damaging actions, and we'll continue to do that. But I'll just say what we're worried about our Clean Air Act waivers. The Biden administration granted a number of them right before he left. After they're granted, they're more defensible than before they are granted. So we think that this legal standard, it's not just pure discretion on the part of President Trump to now revoke what's been granted. There has to be a meeting of the standard. We'll test whether he meets that standard in court. We think he won't be able to if he seeks to revoke them. But I think it's no surprise that we expect our waivers to be attacked by President Trump. They were in Trump 1.0, and they probably will again be in 2.0.
Thank you. Okay, next question. In the last Trump administration, the California AG had to litigate to defend the California Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. They're back. Is that going to be on the AG's agenda again?
Yeah, I mean, every one of our protections, every action that the Trump administration takes to undermine our laws, violate the law, attack our progress, we will put to the test of legality. Did he follow the Administrative Procedures Act? Does he have the authority to do what he's seeking to do? Has he used budget money appropriately, as he did not when he tried to build the wall the first time in Trump 1.0? Has he overreached? Is he in compliance with the Constitution? Those questions were often answered in a way that showed that Trump broke the law in Trump 1.0. So we will hold him accountable on any of the laws, on any of the actions that he takes, and our North Star is the rule of law, and if Mr. Trump is breaking it, we'll stop him in court.
Okay, this one is a little near and dear to my heart. I know there's a number of us, I see friendly faces in the crowd that also run nonprofits, so this is from all of us. What can be done to protect those fighting for progress against retaliatory legislation and litigation targeting nonprofits and state officials? So SLAPP suits, I know there's been some CEQA issues recently with, communities filing civil suits, and the developers have been suing the attorney, that's filed the suit. So what is it we can do as an industry as well?
This is a time of many challenges, including weaponization of the law, weaponization of litigation. In California, we've always tried to put as many protections in place as possible when it comes to honoring and protecting the values and beliefs, rights and freedoms that we subscribe to here, even when the federal administration does not. We've done that when it's come to reproductive freedom, when it's come to gender-affirming care, and providing a safe haven here in California where people are protected. We're aware of some of the actions that are being taken when it comes to congressional legislation to attack our nonprofits. We deeply support and believe in and will have the back of our nonprofit organizations. We see all of you as partners, part of the same mission and progress. We always believe that we're at our best when we're working in collaboration with our nonprofit leading experts in the field, and you have a voice and a role that needs to be protected, and they shouldn't be able to have legislation that weaponizes against you or litigation that does. So there are protections in place now. If more need to be put in place in California, I know that will be an area of great interest for me, for our legislative partners, certainly for the governor as well. But it's part of the flood the zone, full frontal attack. And we saw this recently when a Trump political appointee put out a memo to DOJ saying, we want you to investigate and consider for prosecution any elected officials or attorneys general or law enforcement entities who are not complying with federal immigration enforcement and not cooperating, even though it is our full 10th Amendment right to respectfully refrain from participation in immigration enforcement so we can deploy our resources, one of the most fundamental uses of our state police power, to use our resources to fight crime and not civil immigration enforcement. So there's a lot of attempts to bully, there's a lot of scare tactics. Some might turn into action, in which we will take action in response, but I think it's important to also call out the bullying and the scare tactics for what they are. We did that recently on this memo, trying to scare public officials from, they were trying to force them to cooperate with civil immigration enforcement, even though laws like the law of California, SB 54, prohibits it.
Excellent. This is kind of in the same vein. This may be a little bit in the weeds here, but topical. How will California respond to conditions on disaster aid? Is there something that your office can do, something that we need to keep in mind?
Yeah, I'll say this. The president ran to be president of the United States of America. He didn't run to be president of the red states of America, and only the blue states of America if they follow the conditions that he puts on their support or aid. It has been the tried and true practice, time-honored practice for presidents and federal administrations to provide disaster relief immediately to states when they're suffering, when they're hurting. When Americans in those states are suffering from a natural disaster, they get aid. There's not a look at the map first to see if their state is red or blue. President Biden, when Florida suffered from a hurricane, a very red state, when Texas suffered from a hurricane, a red state, provided disaster relief immediately, as he should, as is the practice, as President Trump should. So I'll sort of push back on the notion here. And if the president wants to be the president, act like a president. Support your people in their time of need. And I think it was good that he came yesterday, so he could see it, the damage, the destruction, the pain, the suffering, to see Americans from all walks of life in need of help and support. And knowing that he can provide it, and that all presidents in the past have, he ought to. So I expect the president to provide FEMA relief to California based on the LA fires. And I'm grateful to our governor, who has fought for California, has fought for Californians, who went out into the tarmac to meet the president and talk to him about the need that California has. That's our president fighting for us, doing his job, and meeting with someone who he may not agree with on many things, but is the president of the United States and can unlock critical funding. And so I was grateful for him doing that, and I hope and believe that the money will come without conditions.
Couple more questions here. What action role will or can the California Department of Justice play in threats to the Coastal Zone Management Act consistency determination? We had a Coastal Act session first thing this morning, so appropriate question given what we talked about earlier.
I mean, I'll answer that from a high level. Our North Star, again, our really only opportunity to get involved and trigger to be involved will be illegality. Is there something that the federal government is doing that is illegal, either based on procedure or on jurisdiction or authority or violating states' rights? This is a time where the 10th Amendment is jumping off the page of the U.S. Constitution, and that we use often when it comes to federal actions to try to commandeer, conscript, force states to do things for the federal government in the way that the federal government wants. We have rights that protect us from that. So like any issue, we'll assess the facts, we'll apply the law, and if there is illegality, we'll go to court. But we'll have to assess it on a fact-specific basis.
Okay, before I ask the last question here, which is kind of trying to ask the Attorney General here how he's going to involve us, I just want to give another round of applause for Attorney General Bonta and Secretary Crowfoot. Thank you. It's great to have state leaders like this. I just was at a conference in Santa Fe with my colleagues from across the country, and I listened to the war stories of Secretary of Natural Resources and Attorney Generals that do not play like this. So we're very lucky to have these two gentlemen working with us in the state of California. Last question here. You have a very willing crowd here today of advocates, organizational leaders, environmental attorneys, and activists. If you could ask us to help, given the new political climate we are in, what would you ask us to do?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, in short, fight, lean in, Speed up, don't slow down. This is a time where there's a lot of folks who are slowing down, who are seeing the rhetoric, seeing the threats, seeing the weaponization of the law, seeing the promises or the threats to prosecute, and backing down. And that is exactly not what we need. The facts haven't changed. The climate science hasn't changed. Our values haven't changed. The urgency to act hasn't changed. The only thing that's changed is a president who has a different view, a view that denies many of those things, denies the science, denies the facts. And people are looking for folks who are going to stand up and act. And it has been the tradition, the legacy, it has been our identity in California to be that state, to be ahead of the other states and the nation often when it comes to the actions that we take. And it's time for us to own that role even more than we always have and lean into it and double down on it. And that means all of us working together. We're at our best again, that sort of story I was sharing about the UFW and the People Power Revolution and the Civil Rights Movement, when we're at our best when we're working together. So this is all hands on deck, all tools in the toolbox, everyone leaning in, everyone stepping up to meet the moment, everyone demanding more of themselves and more of each other and holding each other accountable. So I want you to hold me accountable. If you think I'm not fighting hard enough or not doing well enough or not taking Trump to court enough, let me know, and I will do my best to accommodate your requests. And it's a time for us to ask us to do more. And I know we're feeling that. That happened in Trump 1.0. It was a silver lining in a horrible time that people stepped up. Activism went through the roof. People were asking, how can we do more? They were running for office. They were fighting harder. And we need that again. We need that energy. So please give all that you can. I know you will. You don't need me to say that. I'm going to do everything that I can. I think that by all of us doing that will inspire others to join as well. Build that movement, build that momentum, build that forward progress, and make California the beacon of hope and light that it's always been. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to roll right into our next session speaker right now. But before we do that, we're going to do a little fun. I'm going to pull the raffle tickets. In fact, maybe I can actually ask Stan to come up here and pull the raffle tickets with me so that we've got 10 books that we're giving off. I'm just going to pull the tickets, call out the names, and then you can pick your book up at the registration desk, okay? So we're raffling off his newest book, The High Sierra, A Love Story, and he's graciously been willing to sign these books out front at the end if you would like. Here we go. First one. Maria Calhoun. Okay, we'll keep these tickets right here. You can pick your book up front. We've got 10 of these. So we got 10 right here. Pablo Garza. Tom Bigelow. I'm pronouncing that last name right? Oh, there we go. Thalia Taylor. Thalia Taylor. That's a tongue twister. Okay, Jessica Chapman. What are we at? Eloise Dresser. 4 more. Michael Warbacher. Warburton. I can't read that.
Marie Colm? K-O-L-M?
Margie. Okay. Nancy Terrell. Tierney.
Nancy Tierney.
Boy, your guy's handwriting is terrible. I thought mine was bad. Jimmy, Chris, I think we're at 10. Is it? This last one. Okay. Maureen Forney. Excellent. Okay, there we go. So if your name was pulled out, please pick up your book at registration. So next, I'm going to ask one of my board members, PCL board members, Judy Corbett, up here to introduce our next speaker.
Well, it's a great honor and a pleasure for me to introduce Kim Stanley Robinson, who is widely acknowledged internationally as the best living science fiction writer by far. He's been writing novels for quite a few years with the general theme of focus on the science and the importance of science, concern about environmental degradation and climate change, and then policies and culture. And thankfully, also with the final message that we can correct our course. We need that today. But what most people don't know about Stan is that he actually lives this stuff. He's been my neighbor in Village Homes. Okay. Better? Sorry. So Stan, I am proud to say, has been my neighbor in Village Homes since 1991. And he's so sort of humble and low-key that I didn't even know that Stan Robinson, that I was voting for the board of directors, was Kim Stanley Robinson. But we built Village Homes as a place where there's an infrastructure that you can live in a more sustainable manner, and infrastructure that would allow the development of a sense of community. But it took people moving in there to actually take advantage of that and do it. And fortunately, we have had that, and it's been incredibly successful. But I give Stan a lot of credit for doing the hard work and continuing to do the work that continues to make Village Homes a fabulous place to live. Stan has taken an active role in the community by writing the newsletter that I used to write. He serves on the Homeowners Association Board of Directors, which is not always a fun job. He's participated in our community activities on various committees. And very recently, this last week, an item came up which was really tough. We had someone who wanted to put an oak tree in a peach orchard that would shade the street and keep the climate a little cooler. But the peaches on those trees were really, really good. And so he had to mediate this disagreement, and it came out well, I think. But more importantly, he's a great writer and somebody whose books always leave us with the feeling that we can do it, we can do it. So we're so privileged to have you here today. Thanks, neighbor, for joining us, and looking forward to your talk.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you. Well, it was already a great pleasure and an honor to speak to you all today, and a special addition to that to be introduced by Judy Corbett, my neighbor and the founder of Village Homes, where I've lived the last 30 years in a community that really matters. It's an unusual achievement, and I very much appreciate it in my life. So, it's a strange toggle between this valley oak that we're going to take out of the citrus orchard, luckily recently planted so it might live, in relocation after tense meetings, to the international and the global. And I make that toggle a lot, and I find it very helpful to have the local and, of course, the state of California as places to come back to in my thinking when having spent much of the last 5 years since the Ministry for the Future came out talking to the rest of the world about global issues of climate change and the crisis that we're in that is usefully called the polycrisis, because it isn't just the climate change and the carbon dioxide and methane in the atmosphere, but also land use, possible pandemics and conflicts of all kinds, food production. And to call it the polycrisis is to indicate that all the different parts of the crisis are interlocked with each other. And you can't solve one without addressing all the rest of them, including inequality on the planet amongst humans. So the polycrisis is one way to name it, and then that can quickly become overwhelming or frightening, and you have to de-strand back again to the individual elements of the crisis, right down to the regional, like here, or the state, and then down to the local and the individual household. So this is one of the first talks I've given, obviously, since the inauguration or since even the election back in November. And a lot has to change because we are in a changed condition, as our Attorney General described so clearly to us. And as has been said by Howard, we're lucky to have him, and Wade, and we're lucky to have California as a place to defend. But it will be a time of headwinds is one way to put it, but a time of chaos and incoherence. The world order through the neoliberal years, for the post-war years, the Keynesian years of the Great Acceleration, the Trente Glorieuses, as the French called it, and then the neoliberal years since the Reagan-Thatcher counter-revolution have all been American-dominated, the sense of a superpower, especially at the end of the Cold War in '91, but ever since then till now, there has been an international order that was set up under the predominance of the United States at the end of World War II. So the UN system itself, but then also the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund. And it's commonly said, and I think it's right, that the United States has been a superpower, maybe the superpower since '91, but also an empire, not in the older sense of empires of physical coercion, but in the modern American sense of owning everybody's debt, the dollar, the financial system of the world being benchmarked against the US dollar, and some 70% of the capital on the planet being owned by American citizens who are only 5% of the world population. This has been the enduring situation, and something, when it begins to look like that soft power empire or that velvet glove on the iron fist of 800 military bases scattered around the world, when that looks like it's being challenged by China, by various forces, then the reaction can be intense to take the velvet glove off. But this is an incoherence, because actually owning people's debt is a better control than having police on their streets, having armies and guns in their faces, because it creates a feeling of hegemony, creates a feeling of cooperation in populations that would naturally throw a bomb under your car, and they have been these last 20, 30, 40 years, against any kind of direct military intervention around the world. So that the neoconservatives, the Bush wars in the Middle East have all rebounded on us badly, because it's easier to fight policemen on the street with guns than it is to fight the banks and your own debt. And so when the United States federal government withdraws from the World Bank, from the World Health Organization, they actually withdraw their financial support, and the voting memberships of those international organizations are predicated on contributions. The more you contribute, the more influence you have, the more votes you have. So as we leave the World Bank is then free to do the necessary things to combat climate change. And in short, an isolationist policy, we go it alone, we are the great independent nation, is exactly contradictory to an effective imperial state, which necessarily is outgoing and commands cooperation, but also It's both coercion and persuasion, that when that goes away, then influence in the world goes away. So what we are seeing is the incoherence of a person that will deny climate change and then want to buy Greenland because the Arctic Ocean will open up. This is the kind of incoherence that we're talking about. And I find it, in some senses, reassuring, because that kind of incoherence cannot actually be effective in the world and is more of a reality TV show and a clown show, a soap opera, than it is actual policy. And the guy doing it likes it that way. He's a reality TV star. He is not a policy thinker. He's not in many ways a thinker at all. So we've got a soap opera going on that is naturally designed to offend people like us, is naturally designed to get in our heads and becomes the topic of conversation, as it is right here. So I'm going to switch over to the larger situation, which exists with or without the soap opera clown show. We still have a world situation that's quite intense, quite dangerous, and needs to be faced up to. And all people of goodwill who actually have a reality principle and believe that you have to acknowledge reality and cope with it, rather than stick your head in the sand or pretend that it's not true, or develop a death cult and tear the world down in a kind of fit of dismay that you are not king of the world anymore. All people engaged with reality are going to have to deal with this situation. We're in a carbon dioxide overshoot. The climate Earth's atmosphere had between 280 and 350 parts per million of CO2 in it, in a fluctuating pattern that's based on differences in the orbit of the Earth and then the tilt of the Earth over time for about the last million years. It's not like it's been steady over Earth's history. Some radically different CO2 components have been existent in the past. But for the last million years, it's fluctuated on a regular basis between 280 and 350. And we shot by 350 around 1990 because, luckily for us perhaps, when the Industrial Revolution began, we were at the 280. So the amount of CO2 that we have put into the atmosphere since then has happened at least 1,000 times faster than it ever did in the natural course of things because of the orbital fluctuations. So we are in an experiment already because of the intense rapidity of this injection of CO2 into the atmosphere. Now we're at about 420. So there is one train of thought that says that humanity and all of the rest of our horizontal brothers and sisters, as Mir called them, all the other wild creatures that we depend on and now depend on us, they'd all be better off. We would be safer in climate terms, given our needs for food for 8 billion people, if we were to get back to 350 parts per million. It implies a carbon drawdown. And since we are burning about 40 gigatons of CO2 per year, higher than when we signed the Kyoto Principle, higher than when we signed the Paris Agreement even. But, I mean, with a little gesture of hope here, since I am a utopian science fiction writer and I was looking for the silver linings, the amount of CO2 burn has been leveling off. It could begin to drop. But 40 gigatons a year is a lot, 40 billion tons of CO2. It's about 1 part per million per 10 billion tons. So every year, the parts per million is going up about 4 parts per million. If we wanted to draw it back down to 350, then we are talking about 500 gigatons or 800 gigatons. I mean, the rounding error here is stupendous, but it depends on how high we go. At 40 gigatons a year going up, that's the entirety of human technological effort. To draw it back down, you cannot imagine any effort commensurate to that. And you also need to understand that certain methods of carbon drawdown don't scale very well and would also be a carbon burner in of themselves. So the carbon drawdown, which is necessary, will probably take a century or two. And it will have to be something that people can make their living doing. So there is a new political economy here, a kind of green political economy being sketched out, where you can make your living by drawing carbon down. In my novel, I called it the carbon coin, but that's just a symbol, a literary symbol for a whole raft of financial instruments that are much more complicated and sophisticated than what I was able to portray in a book written 6 years ago. Things are being worked on that front, and I want to describe some of them, being financial in nature, but the necessity means that we will have to take every means possible to draw carbon down. They're good. Reforestation of places that we have deforested, all good, that's restorative. Regenerative agriculture, if we can grow food and pull carbon into the soil at the same time, an open question being investigated here at UC Davis in the agricultural department, et cetera, because it sounds so good that when you talk to actual ag experts and they look worried, you realize it might be harder. There are limits on it. It's a question of, can you grow a lot of food, enough for human beings, and draw carbon down into the soil at the same time? It's possible, and that would be a huge double win. Then also the ocean draws down carbon all the time. You could perhaps increase that by making seaweed a crop has been proposed, the sea grass. Also, and this begins to get controversial, this is where carbon drawdown goes from natural restoration methods to what can be called geoengineering methods, fertilizing the ocean with dust or iron dust or anything to make plankton grow faster, which when it dies or feeds other creatures it dies, it takes the carbon to the ocean floor. That's a methodology. And then also the effectively weatherizing. You can grind up various kinds of rock, olivine, and then the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere bonds to that rock. You could create gravel thrown into fields, you could create sand thrown onto the beaches, and then you could draw carbon dioxide down that bonds quickly with these minerals in mineralization. Lastly, the mechanical means, these big vacuum cleaners, like in Iceland or in Zurich. You make a machine, it sucks the carbon dioxide out, it turns it into frozen rice, you inject it deep into the crust somewhere, under a salt dome or the bottom of the sea where it's cold and stays frozen. There's lots of space, but there's lots of CO2. And these machines, you would have to have something like, not just the United States auto industry, but perhaps the auto industry of the entire world working on carbon drawdown machinery in order to actually get the scale of CO2 removal that you would want. And then you'd have to build all that stuff. So clearly, mechanical means won't be enough. But if you can find it just to reforestation, you would have to reforest like the surface of Asia, or some people say the surface of 2 Earths. In other words, there's not enough land surface out there for us to use reforestation as the one and only method of carbon drawdown. The oceans are vast, there are plans involved, and some of them are getting quite, can I say, imaginative or even ornate. Sir David King was environmental minister for Tony Blair, and he now runs an institute at the University of Cambridge in England. And Sir David says, we need to be able to generate whale poop at industrial scale. And I said, why? He said, well, we killed 95% of the blue whales. These were intense biopumps, these animals, these fellow creatures. They ate low, they pooped high, and then that fed an entire ecology in the surface of the oceans that then died and went to the bottom of the ocean. So this is a kind of a peculiar kind of, how can you say it, organic agriculture or aquaculture that is also restorative. So, okay, we're messing with the oceans, but actually we're restoring what we took out of the oceans by killing all the blue whales off and all the rest of them. These kinds of complicated solutions are going to be on the table as carbon drawdown, and they're all interesting. They all need to be on the table in this moment of crisis, but they are also controversial. The story about them has to be told, and they would need to be paid for. So the way I want to describe it to you as I finish this section on the CO2 overshoot is, it is as if we are now trying to build the sewage system after we've spent 100 years of poisoning the landscape with our wastes. So, okay, we've got our sewers, right? And then we've got our sewage treatment plants. What if we had all, like the whales, pooped and then spread it around the environment and then said to ourselves, oh no, we have to collect it all up again? It's much harder, and it's nobody wants it. There is not a market for frozen CO2, dry ice. You know, a dry ice you could use a little, and you might even be able to turn carbon into construction materials and replace concrete with it. That's still like 1 to 5% of the amount of CO2 that we need to bring down. So we've got a waste product that is dispersed in the atmosphere that needs to be pulled in. And I think it's useful to think of it as a sewage system that has to be built after the fact. How a century or two's work, how are we going to pay for it? And this is where I really have to change on my talk from what it was before. Because I was saying before, we have the money to pay for it and we have the methodologies to pay for it. But of course you have to have the will. And when I say pay for it, I am talking about the central banks. I'm talking about governments here, the nation-state systems and their currencies. No cryptocurrency is anything more than a private agreement or a scam, because what we trust is fiat money, money that comes out of central banks. And you can pretend to trust other people with cryptocurrencies, but at some point you're saying, what is this worth in US dollars? And can I convert it really fast to US dollars? You need a fiat currency. And in the crisis, the financial crisis of 2008, and in the financial crisis that the pandemic caused in 2020, the central banks of the world generated somewhere between $5 and $15 trillion really quickly. And it's more, they don't like it if you say they spun new money out of thin air. They like to talk about they have some bonds, they sold some, they bought some. It's too scary to remind us that money is a fiction, that money is a group agreement amongst us, that it is a, I like this description of money because the more you look at it, the scarier it gets. Money is for a medium of exchange, it's for storage of value, and it's a sign of social trust. And that third one is interesting. The fact that money works means that at some certain level, human beings trust each other in the same way that you trust that your iPhone will work on the other side of the world, which is a kind of a organizational miracle, not just infrastructure, but systems and humans. Money is that same kind of thing. And the central banks ran an experiment. They were scared. And in the first one, they paid the banks who continued to do their foolish thing in 2008 to keep the economy liquid. In the pandemic, they actually paid individuals and businesses to stay alive through the instantaneous depression that the pandemic could have been and wasn't. And at that point, they didn't see much in the way of inflation or deflation, which this is how economics works. They couldn't even tell for sure what tons of extra money would do. But certainly risks of either one are what central banks are precisely charged with avoiding. We want about 2% inflation per year. Not 0, but 2. That's what seems to be best according to our current models. And anything else that we're asked to do, except for perhaps employment levels, which comes in as a secondary thing for our Federal Reserve and all the central banks, anything else that central banks are asked to do, is they would say, well, that's not our task. That's for legislatures. That's for the other parts of government. We're here to keep money stable. The West German constitution used to have a constitutional right to stable money. And it makes sense to say so, especially given the German experience of the 1920s. So making more money up is possible at the central bank level, and they are talking about it. There was a network for greening the financial system that is a club, a think tank, or a discussion group of 90 of the biggest central banks, including ours, China's, the EU's, et cetera. I didn't know about this when I wrote Ministry for the Future, but the network for greening the financial system is advising all the central banks, we need to do this. And I like the underlying logic here. You can't keep money stable when the world is burning down. And so we have to save the environment as part of our Inflation Reduction Act. There's something actually logical about the name of the great achievement of the Biden administration. The Inflation Reduction Act is a silly name, and yet strangely accurate. You have to have a stable world to have stable money. So for the banks, given their one prime directive, they're now engaged in the project of stabilizing the world. Can we pay for the necessary work, which has now been calculated, and they talked about this at COP 29 in Baku, Azerbaijan. It'll cost $1 trillion a year per year to do the green work necessary to have the transition, the green transition to clean electricity, to get off of fossil fuels. There was a big argument in Baku, as always at the COPs, and finally at the end of it, the developed nations gave in to the developing nations and said, okay, we'll put $300 billion into the fund that had been established just the year before in Egypt's COP. Well, nobody at these COP meetings has the slightest bit of a bank account. They are diplomats representing their nations who go back to their nation states and say, oh, by the way, we promised this much. And people at the national governments back home said, why did you do that? We don't want to do that. And those bank accounts have stayed empty. Promises made under the Paris Agreement have been substantially broken. Money has not been there. The first promise of $100 million, 5 years late, they came up with 20 million, which is indeed the sewage budget of the city of New York per year. And that was given mostly as debt relief to developing countries. So developing countries have gotten quite cynical about the COP process and about the promises made by the developed countries to pay for damages in the developing countries, which is stated twice in the Paris Agreement as part of the deal. And there's a list of which country is which is part of the problem, because China, Indonesia, and Saudi Arabia are not on the list of developed countries. So it's messy, but my point is this: the central banks are ready to move. And because we're such social primates, when there's momentum towards doing these things, when it seems like the right and necessary thing to do, they can be forwarded. When there's a fear, when people are leaving the Banks agreement that they made in Glasgow to pitch in and do green projects, and Mark Carney had $130 trillion worth of assets promised on green work, and all the banks have been dodging out of that agreement in this last month since the election, you see that we are cautious creatures, and that many people in charge of huge amounts of money are entirely devoted to the highest rate of return, as opposed to decarbonizing or saving the environment. So it's really governments that can control the rate of return by way of both carrots and sticks. Laws, guidelines, norms, requirements that governments set the economy up, and then private capital moves like water downstream, the path of least resistance to the highest return possible. That needs to be guided. And now it's as if there might have been some levees that we were concocting that for the next 4 years, there's actually going to be people blowing up the levees rather than building more. And so we do have some extra problems. The other methods that I was going to mention, the International Monetary Fund has a thing called special drawing rights. This is a concoction made up by World Bank and IMF with the help of the Rockefeller Foundation and the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. So private think tanks and philanthropies help the IMF to concoct a financial plan. They have loans to developing countries who are at risk of defaulting, of going broke, of having their country fall apart into a failed state. And these are loans that they don't have to pay back. So is that really a loan? No, it's a special drawing right. And I think the name is deliberately obscuring and even hard to remember on purpose, so that you don't understand that an international monetary fund is giving poor countries money for nothing, except to save themselves from turning into a failed state. There's also taxes in general, the carbon tax. There's this idea of micro-taxing for financial trading. High-speed financial trading goes many times per second, and if there was an extremely small tax on every transaction, quickly billions would be taxed away from this high-speed trading, which only benefits a very, very few number of people. So there are schemes to make money. You could also indeed quit the carbon subsidies. That looks a little backwards now, given the current administrations, but since there is a massive amount of subsidizing of fossil fuel new production being done by governments, that need only be reversed to subsidizing green work to substantially pay for what needs to be paid. And then another notion would be that the massive military budgets of the world, especially the United States, that if national defense was conceived of also defense of the country's land. And this is something that has traction within the Pentagon, I'm happy to report. I've seen it myself. To defend this nation, you actually have to defend the land that it's on, including its sea level. And sea level rise is one of the offstage but extremely severe results of our warming temperatures. It's one of the first and worst of the tipping points that we might hit. And so military budgets that are suddenly devoted through things like the cold labs and the Army Corps of Engineers and the US Navy's construction programs abroad, they could become part of this climate work as well. So the money is there for what has been called a global just transition, that equity and equality are written into the Paris Agreement and written into any agreement that makes sense, that since climate change is harming the poorest people on the planet who burn the least carbon fastest, that equity is part of the saving of the world in both a practical and a human sense. I don't even know what to say next, and I want to bring this to a close. And also, Howard said I should shift to a question and answers, and he will wander the audience with a microphone. That's cool, and also moderate and bring it to an end, et cetera, for the Q&A. But I want to end with a couple of points. One, a horrific problem. 70% of the fossil fuels on the planet are owned by nation-state governments. So Exxon, Shell, Chevron, of course, oh my God, nationalize them instantly. Why not? But you would still have Nigeria, Venezuela, South Africa, the Middle Eastern states, Indonesia. These are petrostates. More than 50% of their national income comes from the selling of and then the burning of carbon into the atmosphere. They've signed the Paris Agreement. They all have. They have reduction plans. What does that mean for those countries? It means what? That they're schizophrenic, that they are under a double bind, that a sword of Damocles hangs over them, where on the one hand, they promise to cut carbon burn. On the other hand, if they do that, they go bankrupt and their society falls apart. What are they supposed to do? I asked this question in places like the OECD or at the World Trade Organization or at the UN itself. And some of them instantaneously said, well, you can't go there. Why? Well, it's the current value of all those fossil fuels, if you were to cost it out, would be $1,600 trillion. So immediately the bank balance of the world blows up. We don't have that amount of money. And so the plans to, how can I say this? The virtuous petrostates, which one of my colleagues laughed at and said it was an oxymoron, the virtuous petrostate to be, and in fact, Colombia is the perfect candidate for it right now, having promised to stop selling and burning their fossil fuels, and they're the 5th biggest coal producer in the world as nation states go. The President Petro said, we need help for this project. We want to stop fossil fuels. They got no help, and now he's in political trouble. So that was the perfect place for the virtuous petrostate compensation plan, which would have to be discounted They would take a haircut, of course, because they're selling poison. It would have to be amortized. They would get paid out over 100 years, because that's how they would get it anyway when they were selling it. And they would be entailed also. Some sovereignty would be given up, like nations give up to the European Union and Europe. We promise not to steal it. We promise to spend it on green projects first. This is an impact on people's sovereignty and will be poorly received. But if it's done that way, the petrostates can survive without burning this carbon that we cannot let become carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, or else those nations also will go under. So I put this out to you as a kind of a conundrum or a problem or a thought that can't really be avoided without us, again, somewhat sticking our heads in the sand, somewhat ignoring the reality of the situation. So, and I leave that as a problem, and I want to move on to something a little more cheerful for the ending. A couple of things. This idea of geoengineering, even though drawing down carbon has scale problems, it has to be done anyway. If the Earth heats up so fast that people in the tropics are dying of it, like the scene that begins the Ministry for the Future, a wet bulb 35 temperature will kill a human that is not in air conditioning. And that has happened twice. We've hit those temperatures. It's a combination of heat and humidity. You know the drill. We can't really let the Earth get too much hotter, or else humans who aren't protected by electrical systems, which go down, will die en masse. So it may be that we might have to consider cooling the planet down while we decarbonize our technology and our atmosphere, which is the latter is a century-long project. Transforming our technology is perhaps more like a 20-year project. We promised to do it by 2050, and we could if we wanted to. We could if we did. So it's one of those promises that is actionable but needs to be fulfilled. Well, in that time, it might get too hot. So these methods of cooling the planet down, they are weird and uncomfortable. They're science fiction ideas, bouncing sunlight back into the atmosphere, thickening the Arctic sea ice. And the one that I want to end on in terms of futuristic thoughts is stabilizing the big glaciers in Antarctica. It turns out that some of the biggest glaciers in Antarctica were rushing into the sea, and then about 120 years ago, they stopped entirely because the water underneath them was diverted elsewhere, a process that happens often in braided stream beds. You see it in any braided stream bed, that some stream beds will go dry. One of them went dry underneath the Cam ice sheet, and it stopped moving, ice stream. And then the other ones, like Thwaites Glacier, the so-called Doomsday Glacier, if we suck the water out from those glaciers, or if we freeze those glaciers to their bottoms using effectively heat pumps, but they call them thermosiphons, we might stabilize the big glaciers in Antarctica for the period of time we will have to take to cool the atmosphere back down and reduce the danger of the complete collapse of the West Antarctic ice sheet. If that were to happen, we would be underwater in this room. There is the capacity in the West Antarctic ice sheet alone. Well, no, maybe we wouldn't, because the capacity for the West ice sheet, if it goes and becomes ocean, sea level is 7 meters higher. That's how big Antarctica is. That's how big that cake of ice is. It's even worse if all of Antarctica were to go, but eastern Antarctica is much more stable than the west, because most of the ice in West Antarctica rests on ground that is under sea level. It's so heavy a cake of ice, it's on the ground, but that's below sea level, sometimes as much as 1,000 feet lower. So water can get under that, it can release, it's released in the historical past, which is to say about 3 million years ago. It happens at temperatures about what we're at right now. We don't want it to happen. It would be the wreckage of civilization. So this might be called geoengineering, but we're calling it this little 501c3 based in California, a bunch of people from glaciology community and from Silicon Valley and from New York and Washington, D.C., to see if we could stabilize the big ice in Antarctica. If you call it geoengineering and say, oh, we should never do stuff like that, then I think you're caught in a previous moment of a kind of human moral history. It's actually something we probably ought to try and see if we can do. So finally, just to get over to Howard and his questions, I want to end with something that's already been said so eloquently by our previous speakers. It's so good to be in California at this time. God bless California. When you think of the shocks that this place has taken, the three immense catastrophes, the gold rush, Hollywood, Silicon Valley, we've done pretty well. It's multicultural, it's multilingual, it is progressive, it is the 5th biggest economy on the planet, it's one of the most beautiful places on the planet. We are lucky, and I guess the way I can end is to say this. A group like this is tremendously encouraging, and there are more of them. This is representative or typical rather than the whole story. It's an actor network. This is what they say in science studies now. It comes from Bruno Latour. An actor network is a network of actors that include, Pasteur's actor network included the bacteria. Marie Curie's actor network included uranium. The Sierra Club's actor network included John Muir and the Sierra Nevada. The range itself was an actor in that network. It's been pointed out that some actors don't seem to have much agency compared to humans. And that's right, but they're still actors. So we are an actor network that the state itself has called into being. So good for us. All right, Q&A.
That's great, Stan. Stan has such small ideas. Small ideas. Okay, questions. Anybody got a question? Yes.
And please do have questions. I need them.
I'd like to hear your most recent thoughts about how we achieve large-scale wildlife corridors, like the Half Earth Project, I think, that was in your the Ministry for the Future book.
Yeah. Wildlife corridors, this is another great California project, which is to say the 30 by 30 program, that 30% of California's land shall be devoted to the welfare of our wild brothers and sisters by the year 2030. I've met Jennifer Norris, and Wade Crowfoot is a big supporter of it, and Mondo Quintero, who runs the California State Parks. California's lucky in the sense that we were already at about 24% of protected land. So getting more is a matter of precisely finding the corridors between one protected area and the next. And for sure, the giant industrial agriculture of the Central Valley of California needs, and this would be better as legislation, should have something like hedgerowing in England back in the old days, but these hedgerows need to be an acre or two wide, so they become wildlife corridors based on creek beds or whatever. Like Puda Creek here in Yolo County is a wildlife corridor, as I don't want to be too dismissive of beautiful Puda Creek, but since it's between levees and it's entirely filled with eucalyptus, you know, it's a kind of a concoction of, and a little bit ugly at certain times of the year. But it's what we've got. It's a creek, it's a wildlife corridor. More of those connecting the areas that we already have is something that needs to be legislated. Also, another project that many of you might know about, this notion that floodwaters during the big rainstorms in the spring and when the snow melts in the Sierra have to be poldered at the right places in the Central Valley where they're sitting over natural French drains and they drop back down into the groundwater. This was a UC Davis and California Water Commission combined conference over there in Sacramento, that if you can find those French drains, which were made at the end of the Ice Age by stupendous floods coming off the Sierra glaciers, and they are sometimes 200 or 300 feet deep, but filled with big boulders and with a little scree of soil on top, they take water down into California's Central Valley groundwater beautifully, compared to the parquet floor of a lot of the Central Valley. And so you need to identify them, get easements on them, make the polder dams and the weirs and everything, and save floodwater. Those would also be wildlife corridors. So that's what I know about, and this is another reason why I love California, is these kinds of issues are not just being thought up, but are being enacted on the land already.
Up here, Stan.
Yeah.
Hi, what are some of your suggested strategies to generate the political will necessary to implement what you're suggesting, financial and otherwise?
Drugs?
Well, there's, you need a 51% working majority. And so I would say you're never going to convince everybody, so let's focus on gathering together that 51% to do what we have to. And then this always sounds suspicious coming from a novelist, but somehow this, and I feel bad in a way, the stories that we tell are important. That's how people are convinced, is by stories and word and mouth. So have our stories. California's story is pretty damn good. We're maybe too defensive about it even, because there is a certain weirdness factor to California that can't be denied and has to be seized with pride. Yes, we are a crazy state. Don't you love it? So the stories matter. And here the story is, it's reality. And our descendants' lives are devastated if we don't cope with reality. You stick your head in the sand, you're a coward. You may face up to it and you do something, then you're coping. And so the comedy of coping is a story that we have to tell better than we have. And also, maybe you have to link it up. It's just a different kind of job. It's jobs. It is human work that has meaning. We're saving the biosphere and dodging a mass extinction event by this work that we do here for the future generations. That's meaning. And those of you, very few of you are as old as I am here, which is good. That would be bad to have a geriatric crowd here. But I remember a time where there was a crisis of meaning in American life because it was not about nothing but commodities, and nothing but consumerism, nothing but capitalism. And there was a bumper sticker, some of you might remember, the one who dies with the most toys wins. That was a bumper sticker in the 80s, I guess it was. And some people were being sarcastic and cynical. Other people, they really meant it. It was a crisis of meaning, and kids didn't know why they were working so hard in school, because what were they working for? And so now, here's how I'd like to put it to people. We have meaning. We have to save the biosphere. It's a crisis in world history. And grab the story at its biggest level and try to tell the story.
Okay, enough for one more question. I like that bumper sticker. I remember that. There was a bumper sticker that came out that has the response that said, "Whoever dies with the most toys still dies." I like that one. Yeah. Okay, we have enough time for one more question. Any more questions for Stan? If you want a book, you have a question? Yeah.
I'm wondering what the name of this glacier building group is, and what you see as like policy and governance-wise we need in place to do any of these geoengineering efforts safely, and to not just have a bunch of Silicon Valley billionaires be behind them.
Yeah.
Why not?
No, the group is called Ice Preservation. And sometimes Ice Preservation Institute, but Ice Preservation, there is a flyer I should have brought maybe, but it's brand new. This is a new organization. And they're very concerned with governance. And their second meeting, the first meeting was technical at Stanford. Could this be done and how would it be done? It was glaciologists mostly. Second meeting was in New York City during Climate Week when the UN launched their Summit of the Future and their Pact for the Future. And I spoke at the UN, and that afternoon I went over to this ice preservation meeting, which was entirely on governance issues, like you're bringing up. And there was a lot of indigenous people that had been invited, leaders from Pacific Islands and from the Arctic, because the experiments necessary would happen in the Arctic, in Alaska and in Iceland and maybe Svalbard, and then Antarctica would be where they would be deployed. There aren't native Antarcticans, except for some crazy scientists and support people who have spent their whole lives down there, and so they might claim native status, but there aren't indigenous Antarcticans. But there are indigenous people all around this earth where sea level is crucial, and the Arctic and ice is crucial. So this group is already in consultation with them at the planning stage, and they have said, if we're in on it from the start and it looks like it's good for the world, then we're interested, but we want to be in on it at the planning stage, and they are. So the phrase that has developed as a guiding phrase for this group is proceed at the speed of trust. And that is an interesting speed indeed. So in the technical sense, the Scientific Committee for Antarctic Research, SCAR, reports to the Antarctic Treaty System, which is an international treaty signed on to by about 40 nations with 13 original signatories that are most active. The Antarctic Treaty holds Antarctica is a commons like the ocean at large, so it has legal standing that is unusually on this earth for landmass. It's by far the largest commons there, or unclaimed territory. Every signatory to the Antarctic Treaty has dispensed with or put aside their territorial claims from the 19th century. So there is a technical group to go to, which is SCAR, then a political group to go to, the Antarctic Treaty, and then there's the what you could call the moral or spiritual group, which is to say make sure that we have the indigenous communities in the Arctic and in the Pacific Islands, and indeed in the South, Maori, Aboriginals in Australia, and in South Africa. They're all trying to involve it. And there's been some bad examples of solar radiation management experiments that look like crazy scientists or Silicon Valley people doing stuff. And we've learned from that experience to proceed at the speed of trust and try to do it as something that the whole world agrees on. So we'll see what happens. It's just one project of many interesting and good projects.
One more. When my chair says he has a question, I have to say yes.
Thank you, Howard. You may not like this question, but there's been a proposal to plant a flag on the planet Mars. What do you think could happen? And you just mentioned uncharted territory. What do you think could happen there?
Well, I mean, I wrote the Mars trilogy in the 1990s, and very often I get introduced as it being still my most famous work, which gives me a little bit of pause since I wrote it in the 1990s and it's now 2025. And I would like to point to those people, the Ministry for the Future, which since it's blown up my life, I want to claim that's my best known work since I've paid for it, so to speak, with 4 years of hard labor. Mars. It's great. I love Mars. After we have come into a great relationship with the biosphere here on Earth, about 200 to 300 years from now, and then Mars will be just like Antarctica. There'll be scientists that go there, there'll be support people that go there, they'll stay about 4 to 5 years, and then they'll come back home. And maybe hundreds of years later, there might be people born on the planet, and we'll see if they're actually viable in 37% gravity. We have no idea. And so this is a thousands of years project. And something happened since I finished my Mars trilogy, which I finished it in 1995. Around 2002, we discovered that the surface of Mars, the sand of Mars that's everywhere, is poisonous with perchlorates. We use it to kill our thyroid glands at parts per billion, and the Martian sand, it's there in parts per 100. And somehow Elon Musk and the other space cadets are not willing to acknowledge this new fact about Mars. You go there, it's poisonous. Well, we always knew that. There's no air to speak of. It's frozen. You would have to terraform it, as in my novels, or live underground. It would be like being stuck in a Motel 6 forever. So I say Mars is lovely, and I like my novel, but it's given some people some wrong ideas, and that's not my fault. It's still a good novel, but it is so irrelevant to our current moment that it's a sign of the head in the sand. It's a sign of escapist, someone who is not willing to confront the real world. And so it's almost an automatic signal. And the fact that I wrote the Mars trilogy, I have to just say, sorry, good idea at the time.
Okay, let's give it up to Stan. Thanks. So I love the dichotomy there, the conversations from A.J. Bonta and Secretary Crowfoot, and then to think way outside the box with these big, huge ideas. We can do it. We're California, right? All right. So, perfect timing. We're on time right now, which is another miracle. And your sessions this afternoon, everyone grab some coffee, get some caffeine in you. We got one more session, and then happy hour, okay? You got to go through the next session to get happy hour. So the water panel is going to be in here. The LA Fire is across the hallway, and the climate resilient infrastructure is down where you got your lunch, okay? Have a great afternoon.